Hey guys, strap in. Today we're descending into a case so bone-chilling, it redefines betrayal. Let's begin. They say that in a love triangle, there's usually only one person who ends up truly content, while the other two are left grappling with heartbreak and emotional distress. But is it ever really possible to walk away from a situation like that without causing damage? Or is the joy of one couple always built on someone else's pain? People will often go to great lengths to hold on to happiness, choosing to forgive, to fight, to believe love can be restored. But sometimes, the hardest truth is realizing that it's no longer safe to run towards someone you once loved, but rather, it's time to walk away. Maria Muñoz's life seemed to be headed for that picture-perfect ending. She had built a thriving career, found stability in marriage, and embraced her role as a mother. On the outside, everything looked ideal. But behind closed doors, cracks began to form. Her husband had started seeing someone else, and rather than making a choice, he decided to stay involved with both women. Maria, devoted to her family, endured this double life for years, believing it was worth the pain if it meant keeping their son and daughter in a stable home. But what began as an effort to preserve a family spiraled into something far darker. The emotional toll, the betrayals, and the unresolved tension eventually led to a tragic and irreversible act, one that would leave scars no one could have imagined. Maria Muñoz was born on August 18, 1989, in the quiet town of Pinellas, located in the southern part of Puerto Rico. The youngest in a modest household, Maria grew up surrounded by simplicity, but she had big dreams. From a young age, she was known for her excellent grades and strong sense of purpose. She dreamed of working in medicine, of helping others, of saving lives. After high school, she was accepted into a well-respected medical university. During her studies, she met Joel Pellow, a young physician completing his residency. Though nearly 11 years older, Joel and Maria quickly formed a deep emotional bond. Their connection turned into a romantic relationship. Soon, they were living together, and not long after, Joel proposed. Maria said yes. In 2011, they relocated to the United States and settled in Laredo, Texas, a city on the border with Mexico. They were both hired by the same hospital. Maria took a position as a nurse anesthetist, and Joel became a surgical assistant, supporting operations in the operating room. Both were ambitious and continued studying to expand their qualifications. Their dual income allowed them to live comfortably. They purchased a spacious home in a good neighborhood and owned 2 cars. In 2015, Maria gave birth to their son, Alejandro, and 3 years later they welcomed a daughter, Valentina. After Valentina was born, Maria decided to take a break from her career to focus entirely on raising the kids and managing the household. But she had plans. Once her son and daughter were older, she intended to return to work and renew her medical license. From the outside, the family looked like a dream. Maria and Joel seemed to have it all: love, stability, a beautiful home, and a future filled with promise. They looked like a couple living their best life. But what no one could see was that behind the polished surface, something far more disturbing was unfolding. Something even those closest to them didn't suspect. On the night of September 22, 2020, a call came into emergency services. The caller was frantic. He said he'd found his wife unconscious, tried to revive her, but she wasn't breathing. That caller was Joel. He begged for medical responders to get to the house as fast as possible. Less than 10 minutes later, a patrol car and ambulance pulled up to their address. The man who opened the door was wearing blue surgical scrubs, which immediately struck first responders as odd. Without pausing, he called for them to follow and sprinted up the stairs to the bedroom where 31-year-old Maria lay motionless on the floor. She wasn't breathing. Her pulse was absent, but her body was still warm. Joel insisted he had been performing CPR for nearly 20 minutes, switching between mouth-to-mouth and chest compressions, but nothing had worked. Emergency medics took over, but despite every attempt to revive her, Maria was pronounced deceased. When asked what he thought had happened, Joel told the responders that Maria might have taken a high dose of strong prescription medication. which he believed may have caused her condition. Medics asked if she had ever had issues with restricted substances, but Joel said she had never used anything of the sort. However, he did mention that she had been struggling with depression and anxiety and had recently been prescribed medications to help manage it. Joel suggested that his wife may have accidentally taken more than the prescribed dose of her medication, which could have had a fatal consequence. However, he quickly added that Maria had been in a deeply emotional and withdrawn state and might have made a conscious decision to end her life. He claimed that she had brought up the subject the day before during a conversation, but at the time, he didn't take her words seriously. When officers asked to see the medication Maria had been using, Joel stepped into the bathroom and returned with a bottle. That in itself raised some red flags. Individuals who choose to end their lives by taking medication typically don't put the pills back in the cabinet. And yet, there were no empty bottles, blister packs, or any other visible signs of discarded medication in the room or near Maria's body. The bottle Joel handed over was nearly full. If Maria had taken any pills from it, it couldn't have been many, and certainly not enough at first glance to explain the outcome. But definitive answers would have to wait for the autopsy and a full toxicology report. While medical personnel worked desperately to revive Maria, police began examining the scene. Alejandro, 5, and Valentina, 2, were asleep in the next room, completely unaware of the tragedy unfolding just steps away. Joel informed officers that he had already contacted family members, and they were prepared to care for Alejandro and Valentina until things were sorted out. Despite the medical team's best efforts, Maria could not be saved. Her exact cause of death was still unclear, and the only witness to the events of that night, her husband, was now the primary person of interest. Joel was taken in for questioning, and those who interacted with him that day noted how off he seemed. Sure, one could chalk it up to grief or shock, but almost everything about his appearance and behavior felt off. He gestured erratically, often jumped from his seat, and spoke in a disorganized, inconsistent manner. A crinkling plastic noise drew attention. It turned out to be the wrapper from a catheter needle, the kind typically used to deliver medication into small veins. When asked about it, Joel casually brushed it off as trash. But what seemed even more suspicious was that Joel had discreetly removed and hidden the same bottle of pills he had previously shown to officers. When asked where the medication had gone, he feigned surprise. Unfortunately for him, police body cams had caught the moment he quietly pocketed the bottle. When shown the footage, he appeared embarrassed and handed it over, claiming he must have picked it up without realizing it due to being in shock. Joel went on to explain that he and Maria had been going through a rough patch. He admitted they were on the verge of separating and had, in fact, been living apart for several months, a detail not even close friends or coworkers knew. He framed the separation as a result of Maria's emotional struggles. According to him, he continued to spend time at the house to stay connected with Alejandro and Valentina, and in hopes of mending the relationship with Maria. Joel claimed that on the evening before the tragedy, he had visited the family, spent time with Alejandro and Valentina, and once they were asleep, he and Maria talked at length. He said it seemed they'd resolved their issues and reconciled, and afterward they shared an intimate moment. He then allegedly went into the shower, and when he returned to the bedroom, he found his wife unconscious. At first, he thought she had fallen asleep, but when he realized she was unresponsive and breathing had stopped, he immediately called emergency services and began CPR. He was unable to provide any clear reason why he was wearing surgical scrubs at home that night. The autopsy revealed no obvious signs of struggle or visible injuries. Maria had passed away shortly before first responders arrived, as her body was still warm, but the circumstances remained deeply suspicious. 3 scenarios were initially considered: self-harm, accidental overdose, or intentional wrongdoing. None were ruled out. Joel stated that about 30 minutes before the incident they had been intimate, but experts found no physical evidence on her body to support that claim. In fact, it appeared he had lied, perhaps trying to create the impression that they had reconciled, even though the reality might have been very different. The autopsy also showed that Maria's stomach was empty. Joel maintained that she had taken her medication while he was in the shower, which he estimated lasted no more than 10 minutes. He then found her unresponsive, called for help, and attempted resuscitation, but she was already gone. The experts, however, were clear. No pills can dissolve and kill a healthy young woman so quickly. Instead, they concluded she had been poisoned with an unknown substance, leading to systemic toxicity, respiratory arrest, and cardiac paralysis. A pathologist noted a small puncture mark in the crook of her right arm, consistent with a professional-grade needle injection. Since it was on her right arm, in a location she could not have reached herself, a detailed toxicology analysis was needed to determine exactly what killed her, and that would take time. When detectives informed Joel that they needed permission to search the home, he visibly grew. He protested, saying his wife was private and would not have wanted someone rifling through her belongings, especially if she had ended her own life. Investigators countered, stating that since the cause of death remained uncertain, they had to explore all possibilities, including foul play. They also mentioned that a search warrant would likely be issued soon regardless, so Joel could expedite the process by cooperating. With no real choice, he reluctantly agreed. Observers noted his anxiety. He may have been planning to return home afterward to clean up and hide potential evidence, just as he had attempted with the pill bottle. As a precaution, he was not released from custody until the investigators completed their initial inquiries. Oddities became apparent immediately during the scene search. Joel's story was that the incident occurred while he was in the shower, but the shower stall was completely dry. There were no puddles, no steam, no damp walls. Investigators also found no wet towels or evidence that he had dried off. Additionally, the medication cabinet was located in the same bathroom. According to his version, Maria had somehow retrieved a lethal dose of pills, taken them without him noticing, then stealthily returned the bottle to its place, where it remained when emergency services arrived. That scenario seemed unlikely, but according to Joel, it went down just that way. In the bedroom, behind the leg of the bed, one of the officers discovered a small butterfly IV catheter, typically used to administer medication into smaller peripheral veins. It appeared to have been hastily tossed there, as if someone hoped it would go unnoticed. The discovery immediately brought to mind the crinkling wrapper Joel had been nervously fiddling with at the station. Investigators believed he had slipped it into his scrubs pocket and, under stress, began manipulating it in his hands during questioning. But the most significant find in the house wasn't a medical item. It was Maria's personal journal, a meticulous record of her thoughts, feelings, and fears kept over the course of several years. It would become a central piece of evidence in what was quickly becoming a complex criminal investigation. The young woman had written about her deep fear of losing her husband, her desperate wish to keep their family together, and her concern about the emotional toll their household tension might take on Alejandro and Valentina. She adored her son and daughter. They were her world, and she confessed she didn't know if she could ever forgive Joel for how he had treated her. As investigators read further into the journal, they became increasingly convinced that Joel had played a significant role in Maria's emotional distress and downward spiral. A couple of years earlier, he had started a relationship with another woman. He wasn't discreet about it, and in fact, he seemed to maintain both relationships simultaneously, unwilling to give up either his wife or his new partner. This dual life caused Maria unbearable emotional suffering. She had tried to hold the family together, never pushing Joel away, hoping he would come to his senses and return to her and the children. At some point, realizing she couldn't handle it alone, she sought professional help. A doctor prescribed her antidepressants, but Maria rarely took them. She worried about side effects and the risk of dependency. She also wrote about her plans to end her extended maternity leave. She had been studying hard to retake the exams required to renew her medical license and return to her job as a nurse anesthetist. It didn't sound like the mindset of someone preparing to give up on life. In fact, during the final month of entries, the tone in her writing began to change. She no longer dwelled on her pain or on reconciling with Joel. Instead, She wrote about letting go of the past and moving forward for herself and for her son and daughter. She even said she was ready to accept a divorce and allow Joel to go his own way, while still hoping to maintain a cordial relationship for the sake of their family. Next door lived a young woman named Adriana, a close friend and confidant of Maria's. When she heard the wail of sirens that night, she immediately sensed something was wrong. The next morning, seeing multiple police cars outside the house, she approached the scene and asked what had happened. When she was informed of Maria's sudden passing, she was stunned and told officers she had something important to share. Adriana confirmed that Maria and Joel had been living separately for nearly 5 months. Though Joel continued visiting, she described how until recently the family had seemed happy. But about 2 years ago, the then 40-year-old Joel had started undergoing a dramatic transformation. He lost a noticeable amount of weight, started hitting the gym regularly, and bulked up so quickly that Adriana suspected he might have been using performance-enhancing substances. He also began paying much closer attention to his appearance, changing his hairstyle, revamping his wardrobe, and adopting a more polished, fashionable look. Alongside Joel's drastic physical transformation came an equally disturbing shift in his personality. According to Adriana, he became arrogant, self-absorbed, and often displayed aggressive behavior. She even suspected he might be using certain restricted substances, though Maria avoided discussing that possibility. Joel's changing demeanor was also reflected in his social media presence. Once a reserved man and a devoted husband and father who posted family photos, he now seemed focused entirely on self-promotion. His feed was filled with provocative images, showing off his physique, often accompanied by suggestive captions, hinting that he was open to a fling. According to Adriana, trouble in the household began while Maria was expecting their second child. Joel became distant, frequently absent from home, and expressed open frustration about his domestic life. He talked about wanting freedom and feeling suffocated by the routine. Maria tried to be understanding, hoping he would soften after the birth of their daughter. But soon, she discovered he was involved with someone else. It didn't take long for investigators to identify Joel's new partner. Her name was Janet Aranda, a young nurse in the surgical department of the same hospital where Joel worked. She knew Maria personally. In February 2018, while Maria was home on maternity leave with their newborn daughter, Joel went on a vacation to Spain with Janet. Eventually, Maria found out but still attempted to save the marriage. That's how the love triangle began, and it would persist for nearly 2 years. Janet came in for questioning immediately upon request. Calm and cooperative, she answered all inquiries without hesitation. She confirmed that she had been in a relationship with Joel for a couple of years and that in recent months he had been living with her. Janet was fully aware that Joel was married and had a son and daughter, and that his wife was someone she knew. Still, she seemed entirely unbothered by the arrangement, believing that he would eventually choose her. Janet stated that Joel never spoke poorly of Maria, never threatened her or expressed any violent intentions. He simply complained that Maria was refusing to grant him a divorce. Janet also claimed she had never interacted with Maria personally and held no ill will toward her. On the night of the incident, she had an airtight alibi. She was working a shift at the hospital. Authorities ruled her out as a suspect. The results of the full toxicology report took nearly 4 months to arrive, and what they revealed shocked everyone. Maria's body contained a high-concentration cocktail of 7 powerful substances. Any one of them in such a dose could have been lethal. Together, they gave her no chance of survival. What stood out most was the nature of the drugs. These were medications typically used in surgical procedures to induce anesthesia, put patients into a medically controlled coma, manage pain, and more. And all of them were easily accessible to Joel. He knew precisely how they worked, what doses were deadly, and how to use them without leaving obvious traces. Still, while suspicion was growing, these findings were considered circumstantial. They weren't enough to formally charge him with a serious crime. That changed the moment police obtained sufficient evidence to act. On the same day the results were reviewed, Joel, who had remained free during the months-long investigation, was arrested at Janet Aranda's residence. He didn't resist and appeared calm, but immediately requested a lawyer. From that point forward, he was no longer a grieving husband. He was now the defendant in a case involving a deliberate act of lethal harm. Given the new developments, investigators decided to re-interview Janet, believing she might know more than she initially admitted. At first, she refused to cooperate, declining to answer further questions. But when offered a deal, full immunity from prosecution in exchange for complete honesty about anything she had withheld, she agreed. Without that immunity, if it turned out she had known about or participated in any part of the incident, she could face charges as an accomplice. Janet then revealed that Joel had been taking certain substances, which he would steal from work. She said he often brought them home and injected himself, after which he would enter a euphoric state. The medications had narcotic-like effects, and she listed 5 specific drugs she remembered, all of which matched the compounds found in Maria's system. Her testimony, combined with toxicology results, provided the foundation necessary to move the case forward to trial. During questioning, Janet shared that on September 21, 2020, the night before the tragedy, Joel made a chilling remark as he was getting ready to visit Maria. He told her that what happened next would depend on how the conversation with his wife went. Joel didn't want a divorce. He was comfortable living a double life, with 2 women who both loved him and feared losing him. He also knew that a divorce meant splitting property and likely being ordered to pay significant support for Alejandro and Valentina. Investigators believe that Joel met with Maria that night, and when she stood firm in her decision to proceed with the divorce, he carried out a calculated plan. He may have offered her something to drink containing a sedative, and once she began to feel unwell, offered to help by giving her an injection, one that he knew would be fatal. The dosage of the medications was several times higher than the lethal threshold. He then waited until she stopped breathing before calling emergency services. This theory explained the absence of physical struggle and why there was no evidence of the intimate moment Joel had claimed. If the injection had been in Maria's left arm, the case could have possibly been ruled as self-harm, but the needle mark was found on her right arm, and Maria was right-handed. It would have been nearly impossible for her to administer an injection in that location on her own. The trial of Joel Pellow began in March 2023, 2.5 years after Maria's passing. It was a difficult case for the prosecution, which relied heavily on circumstantial evidence. Without Janet's testimony, there was a real chance Joel could have walked free. One of the strongest pieces of evidence was Maria's personal journal, filled with hopeful plans for the future and no indication that she intended to harm herself. Joel had managed to dispose of the syringe used to deliver the fatal combination, but he lost track of the needle, possibly due to being under the influence of substances himself at the time, which impaired his judgment. Under pressure from the mounting evidence, Joel eventually admitted that he had injected Maria, but he claimed he only did so to calm her down, insisting she was acting erratically. He continued to argue that she had taken an excessive amount of her prescribed medication and that the injection merely intensified its effects, but wasn't the cause of death. Despite his legal team's efforts, on March 30, 2023, 45-year-old Joel Pellow was found guilty of first-degree murder and tampering with evidence. He was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 30 years. Thanks for watching, everyone. See you soon.